A pleasant good afternoon to our listeners of Kwentong Likas Yaman. Today is another Wednesday that we will share with you a topic about a special animal we call frog. In Filipino, we call it palaka. And our guest speaker today, or our resource person, will be introduced to you by my co-host, Dr. Letty. Dr. Letty, take it away.
Hello, good afternoon everyone. Good morning again. Magandang umaga sa inyong lahat. It's rainy season coming in and ang palaka ay indicator ng darating na ulan. When the rain comes or the changes in humidity happens, the frogs make their sound off first and they are the ones who sense the coming rain. And so this is our topic. It is very interesting because our guest is somebody who is not locally Filipino. He is our guest. He comes from Cordova, Maryland, and he became interested in natural world because of his grandparents. He was the first member of his family to earn a college degree, which is a bachelor's degree in environmental studies from Washington College in Chestertown, Maryland in 2003. In 2008, because of a great passion for a study on herpetology, he left and sold his belongings in his original place and moved to Puerto Rico. He served there as a volunteer coordinator and a herpetologist at the Las Casas de la Selva, which is a 400-hectare privately owned sustainable forestry project in the mountains of Patillas, Puerto Rico. In 2013, he was awarded the Earthwatch Neville Shulman Award for Emerging Environmental Leaders, which allowed him to travel to Belize, Panama, and other areas in Latin America to continue his herpetological training. In 2015, he came to the Philippines for the first time as a Fulbright student. From 2016 to 2019, he took his master's degree studies in environmental science at the Universidad del Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras, while also continuing to visit the Philippines to lay the groundwork for Project Palaka Phase 2. In June 2019, he finished his master's degree. And after completing his thesis, which focused strongly on the impact of hurricanes on herpetofaunal assemblages in El Yunque National Forest, he returned to the Philippines in November 2019 out of love. Love for frogs and love for someone special. Yes. Okay. So I'm so happy that these things happened to him. Now, he is currently a research scholar at the Center for Environment and Society at Washington College. And in early 2021, congratulations for this, Norman, he was awarded a 4-year appointment to the Fulbright Specialist Program. And he is also named a National Geographic Explorer. So our guest is really an achiever, one who has love and passion on herpetological studies, and he came here. I really mean it. He came here because of love. Okay, JD, go.
So I'm so glad that Sir Norman will be sharing with us about this Palaka project, which I think is a focus, no, aside from the love of his life. And the reason why he is here in the country to have this project be realized, the Project Palaka. So with that, I would like to ask, give us a background on this Palaka project and how did it came about and what are the objectives of this Palaka project?
Sure. Excuse me. So in 2015, as Dr. Letty said, I was very fortunate and awarded a Fulbright Award, which is an educational exchange award between the United States and several other countries, including the Philippines. And So for example, Filipinos can also apply to go study in the United States, and so on and so forth. And I was looking at the Philippines because of my time in Puerto Rico. There is the shared history, even though the two countries on opposite sides of the world. And so a little hobby of mine is I do enjoy history, even though my love is herpetology. I also love reading about history. So I thought I would love to visit the Philippines and see about the culture, the people, but also the frogs. And I noticed there was not anything going on with ex situ conservation. Now, in case any of your viewers are not aware, ex situ is sort of just a fancy way of saying captive breeding. You're ex situ, you're taking the animals out of where you normally find them in the wild. Zoos are an example of ex situ conservation. You're removing the animal from the wild. And so I reached out to Dr. Letty and Dr. Juan Carlos Gonzalez, and we came up with a list of species from Mount Makiling, mainly because, well, the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, is in charge of taking care of the Mount Makiling protected area. It was easy to, comparatively speaking, to get the project underway. And the museum provided an entire building, the hortorium, for the project. And our purpose of that first phase was just to demonstrate, yes, we can do it. We can successfully collect frogs from the wild, keep them alive in captivity, and now we can move forward with species that are truly in need of some sort of captive breeding conservation efforts. And so, of course, that's our main objective, which is establish captive populations of threatened Filipino amphibians. But with that comes a whole host of others. So obviously, providing research opportunities for students. That is a close second. I actually was just meeting with a graduate student yesterday. I'm so excited that students are starting to join in on this project. It's a major goal of mine to have all the number of students that we can comfortably fit into the project. I want them to join. I want them to feel welcome. And then another aspect is educational outreach to schools, starting off here in Los Baños, and then we will see about expanding to other areas. But once we get back to some semblance of normalcy and there are students in the classroom again, I am designing a program to go around to local schools and, what is an amphibian? What do you think an amphibian is? What is a reptile? Things like that, just sort of so that they learn a little bit about these animals. And lastly, Project Palaka will have a policy of hiring local community members as field guides and such in places where we study, because it's very easy to come up with conservation ideas and just say, okay, do this. But communities that live in areas with conservation threats, a lot of times they're trying to feed their families. They can't worry about that. They need some sort of economic incentive to participate. So in general, those are our main objectives.
Yeah, thank you for answering the first two questions of our inquiry. But yeah, before we venture into the details of the Project Palaka, could you first give us a background of what you have done in the past that gave you confidence to come over to the Philippines and do something like this in the Project Palaka?
Sure.
I know, of course, that you've had a rich background. Could you give us a picture of that? Describe what you have experienced and how such experiences continuously fired up your passion for this field of study.
Sure. Should I go ahead and show my slides while I talk, or?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so of course, there we are. Project Palaka with So what's interesting is Project Palaka, just because of my experiences, it joins in a way the Philippines and Puerto Rico. The logo, I have no artistic talent. The logo for Project Palaka was designed by this wonderful student at the University of Puerto Rico who has artistic talent that I just don't have. So sort of leading up to what Dr. Letty asked, is sort of encompassed in the question of how did I end up in the Philippines, which is a great question. Now, as Dr. Letty alluded to, in 2008, after graduation in 2003, I stayed in Maryland and then I moved to Atlanta, Georgia. But in both of those places, I was working as an environmental consultant. Now, I don't know about here in the Philippines. I know that there are environmental consulting firms, but I will say that in the United States, environmental consulting has less to do with preserving the environment and more to do with making sure your client follows the letter of the law, but not necessarily the spirit of the law. So I sort of got tired of that and seeing the results of that industry. And I had always wanted to study herpetology. My thesis at Washington College had to do with amphibians, and I really wanted to be a herpetologist. So in 2008, as Dr. Letty said, I sold most of my belongings, and I found this place in Puerto Rico. The property is called Las Casas de la Selva, and it's managed by a group called Tropic Ventures Research and Education Foundation. And they have a 400-hectare sustainable forestry project. They are trying to demonstrate genuine sustainable tropical forestry. So once I went there, I started studying the anoles, which are these little lizards on the left-hand side of the screen here. And so this is Anoles gunlaki, which is the yellow-chinned anole, very common understory anole. This is Eleutherodactylus coqui, which is the most common frog in Puerto Rico. This is the coqui. It is a symbol of Puerto Rico, and it has its name from its very unique and very loud call, which is coqui, coqui. So I started off studying very common animals like this, and then moving on, and this will sort of relate to what we're doing with phase 2 of Project Palaka, but this is Eleutherodactylus cookie, C-O-O-K-I. This is, in Puerto Rico, it's called the wajon, or the coqui wajon, because it lives in what are called wajonales, which are these sort of small riverside caves that are found in the lower to mid-mountain streams and rivers in the southeast of Puerto Rico. So it is a habitat specialist. The great thing about studying this species is it's easy to tell male from female. The bright yellow throat, that's a male. Females won't have that. So this species is protected by the U.S. Endangered Species Act.
Okay.
And so the genus Eleutherodactylus, just like Platymentus here in the Philippines, they are, as you can see here, they are direct developers. So here's a clutch of wajon eggs. They lay them on the side of a rock, normally inside one of those little wajonales, and the male tends to the eggs until they hatch. And so once I had sort of dipped my feet in the water by working at Las Casas de la Selva, we partnered with a group called Earthwatch. Now, Earthwatch is a great organization that promotes citizen science. And what they do is, when you are a small conservation project and you could use some more manpower, they send you volunteers that sign up to do these projects to help you gather data. And they also had an award, the Neville Schulman Award, which I was fortunate enough to win in 2013. And this took me to Belize. Now, I wanted to branch out a little bit, get some experience with all sorts of different reptiles and amphibians. So there's a place in Belize called the American Crocodile Education Sanctuary, or ACES. I think they have since changed their name to ACES Wildlife Rescue, but they were ACES when I was there. And of course, they work with crocodiles. So in Belize, there are an increasing number of crocodile human interactions, and it can result in two outcomes. One, very often the crocodile is killed, or two, you can call ACES and they will relocate the crocodile. The species in Belize, they are not, it is very rare that one of those crocodiles kills a human. You hear it occasionally, but normally it's the other way around, people killing crocodiles. So here I was back when I thought having, thankfully you can't see it, but I had very long hair in a ponytail at the time, helping to transport crocodiles that were being relocated. Skipping around a little bit. So this is actually from 2017 to 2019. So
very nice.
Yeah, very strange animal, this one here. So there's a professor at the University of Puerto Rico, Nick Brokaw, and his wife Sheila Ward, and they do a lot of work in Belize. Now they are I always call them tree people. They are interested in forestry, forest dynamics, but they are very supportive of other types of ecological research. So I go with them sometimes, and I just do herp surveys at this place called the Rio Bravo Conservation and Management Area, which is the largest terrestrial preserve in Belize. I think it covers 4% of the land surface of the country. And it's just so great, the things you find there. So this strange looking animal to the left, this is called a Mexican burrowing toad. And it has such a strange shape, which sort of helps it with its life cycle. This species spends the majority of its time underground. They come up, and I want to make it clear, I am not a Mexican burrowing toad expert, but from what I have read, they only come up a few days to breed, and then they go back under. So their little feet are very good at digging, and they hold a lot of water, a lot of moisture, and they really are just like a big blob in your hand. So we caught this one while it was slowly moving across a road towards a puddle that I guess it was going to engage in breeding in. And then of course over here is the always iconic red-eye tree frog, which as soon as anyone sees that, you just think of the tropics immediately. What's interesting is the area of Rio Bravo management area where I have been working is a very distinct wet, dry forest. And so it's really cool to see in the dry season, you still find these guys. You just go wherever the water is. It's so easy, because during the dry season, they will just congregate wherever there is any water to be found whatsoever. But jumping back a little bit, what set me up for Project Palaka in the Philippines was back in 2013 in Panama. So as part of the Neville Shulman Award. Now the Smithsonian Institute does a lot of research in Panama, and they also do a lot of conservation work. So they have 2 captive breeding projects, one of which is called PARC, Panama Amphibian Rescue and Conservation Project. And they work not exclusively, but almost exclusively with the genus Atelopus, which are sort of referred to as the Harlequin frogs. So the genus Atelopus, really interesting. Again, not an expert on Atelopus, but they seem to be hit by climate change, chytrid fungus, all of these threats particularly hard. I actually was researching them. It says apparently 40% of described species of Atelopus are believed to possibly be extinct. So these guys are hit pretty hard. And this is a captive breeding project. This little guy here was my favorite species, Atelopus Limosis. And then here you see Atalopus Glyphos and Atalopus certus. Some of these species have a range of 1 mountain. they will have one mountain where they are found on. So that, of course, makes it easier for some sort of threat to kill them off, if you already have a naturally small range. But it was here in Panama that I really got some training to do captive breeding conservation, which, of course, that was 2013. And so then it takes a year to apply to the Fulbright. So in 2014, I applied. And in 2015, I was off to the Philippines. There's me. The
I
suit.
saw Dr. Alice Bungay there. Do you know her?
I don't.
Picture. Mom
But-
Alice is a friend of mine. She's
Oh,
there.
really?
The
The
one
lady in
blue.
brown? Is that
No,
the lady?
the lady with the colorful blouse at the
Oh,
far
okay.
right. Far
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's a vet med. She's a public health microbiologist.
Hey. Yeah, it's a
Small
small world. It is a small
Yeah,
world.
true.
Yeah.
I saw it easily. Okay,
Yeah.
continue, sir.
Oh, no, that's quite all right. So this was when I actually gave my final presentation at the end of Project Palaka Phase 1.
Oh,
I joke with everyone, the suit is a little tight because of all the show pow I had eaten. Now these two, this young woman here and this young man here were Filipino and this young woman here, Filipino students looking to apply to the Fulbright to go to the US, but everyone else were fellow Fulbrighters that were here doing something in the Philippines. The Fulbright's amazing. It doesn't have to be science. This young woman, she was working with local churches on a social issue. This young woman was looking at soils. She was doing a soil study. And I forget what everyone else is doing, but the Fulbright is so great because it gives you a lot of freedom to study what you want. And so, yeah, that's sort of how I ended up here in the Philippines.
okay. So thank you for sharing the different species of frogs. But I'm just curious, how is it compared to our species here in the Philippines? I mean, what about the biodiversity? Is it worth, I mean, comparable, or how can you describe our amphibian or frog biodiversity in the country?
Well, there's so much biodiversity here in the Philippines. I'll be the first to admit I'm still learning. The vast majority of my experience has been with the genus Platymentus, which is really interesting to me because in Puerto Rico, I mainly worked with Eleutherodactylus frogs, and there's so many similarities.
Yeah.
Both of them being direct developers, for example, but there's easily more biodiversity here in the Philippines. For example, in Puerto Rico, if I'm remembering correctly, there's 19 native species of amphibians. That's it. 19 native species of amphibians.
We have 116 in the Philippines.
Yeah. I was about to say,
Oh my goodness.
I think there's more than 19 in Mount McKeeling alone. Dr.
Yeah, 24.
So, and what's interesting is of those 19 species in Puerto Rico, 16 are genus Eleutherodactylus, if I am remembering correctly.
And there's only one Eleutherodactylus in the Philippines, and he's an introduced species.
Yeah, he doesn't belong here.
Doesn't belong. And it is very, very tiny.
I think the greenhouse frog, I think.
Yeah, the greenhouse Planirostris, Planirostris is the one that they did.
So yeah, the Philippines, I feel like you could spend a lifetime looking at the biodiversity of this country. There's just so much. And taxonomy is not my specialty, but it seems like every year there's just more and more new species being described. Not just reptiles and amphibians. I think they just described new species of begonias, new species of spiders. Yeah.
Yes.
So I don't think it would ever be possible to, as somebody who wasn't born here and spent his whole life, I don't think I'll ever be an expert on Philippines biodiversity because there's just so much to learn. But that's also what makes it fun.
Norman, you have to do it by thematic groups. You can never be an expert of all Philippine biodiversity. No, It is going to break your head, no? That's why we have ornithologists, we have herpetologists, we have mammalogists, and
Yes,
we can't even cover them all, no?
exactly.
How beautiful this country is. Yes.
Yes. I will say, in what's interesting, this might be of interest to some of your viewers in Puerto Rico. So you tend to see this on islands in the Caribbean, which is you have, compared to other areas, you could say that you have low diversity, which is not to say there's no biodiversity, but you have high abundance. So, for example, if I remember correctly, there was a study that was completed a long time ago on Eleutherodactylus coqui that in the ideal habitat, I think it was something like 20,000 per hectare possible estimates. The nights in Puerto Rico are loud. You know, here, if you're in the jungle or the rainforest at night, it's somewhat silent. It's quiet in the daytime in Puerto Rico, and at night it's actually quite loud because the coquis, there's just so many of them. Same thing with the little tree lizards, the Anoles lizards. You'll find one on every tree, every
How does
bush.
the Anole sound? What's the sound of the Anole?
The Anoles don't really make sounds. They use dewlaps to communicate. The males, and in some species, the females, although it's normally always smaller, they have a dewlap. And there's still a lot of research being done as to what it all means, because the males will get on the tree and sometimes they'll flash the dewlap 2 times or 3 times, or they'll combine it with what are called push-ups, because it honestly looks like they're push-ups. And some of them are territorial displays to get other males out of the territory. Others are to attract females. Really interesting lizards, and they are everywhere. It's actually very easy a lot of times it's very easy to find the animals you're looking for in Puerto Rico or in Caribbean islands. There are some secretive ones. There's a lizard, and of course, genus Diploglossus, which is they're similar to the skinks that you see here. The emerald, I think the emerald tree skink you kind of see quite a bit here in the Philippines. The difference is the Diploglossus is it lives in leaf litter. So my entire 11 years in Puerto Rico, I think I saw a half a dozen of them. So there are some secretive species, but for the most part, you have a few species that are just everywhere.
That emerald skink is the Dacia ismaragdina, very common at the Mount Maclean, very near my old house in Forestry. Yeah.
I want to ask a question to Sir Norman, particularly on the significance of these amphibians, or these amphibians to us, ano? I mean, in the ecosystem, and particularly on the project. What do you think are the benefits that this would bring to the country and to the community? Aside from the university, which is also a partner in your project.
So aside from the ecological benefits of preserving native biodiversity, you know, I think there's something to be said for the challenge of showing that a project like this can be accomplished. One thing that really surprised me when I first came to the Philippines is, even though there are areas where we need, I would say that there is a need for more environmental education, biological education. People here really seem to love their biodiversity, even if the only thing they know is, you know, the Philippine eagle or this or that or some sort of iconic species. I have noticed a significant amount of pride in the animals, the plants, the natural habitats of the Philippines. So I think this project, first and foremost, it should be something that we want to succeed, because there are other countries in Southeast Asia that have captive breeding projects for amphibians. And so the very first thing to say is, why not the Philippines? I can't think of a single good reason why we can't have this here. I honestly can't. So first, I think, and I'm talking about the project, not me in any capacity, because a project is many people, but I think this project has a potential to be a source of pride, and it should. The second, more important than that, though, is I think the research opportunities for students, and that is both in the short term and the long term, because in the short term, of course, those opportunities are get students here into this project, working, learning, getting experience in the field. Long term, my dream, and we'll see if it happens, but what I would love to do is all of those projects that I just mentioned to you, I am actually working to incorporate a US 501c3, because what I would like to do eventually is have a sort of, I guess you could say, study abroad program to give Filipino students the opportunity to go to those projects as well, and perhaps even students from those projects to come to the Philippines and see what's happening with Project Palaka and everything we are doing. So, and then again, the other thing that I think is important is I really am serious about the idea of establishing a sort of permanent educational outreach. Again, starting in Los Baños, and we can see how far we can take that. So those are I would say, the immediate benefits.
Thank you for that. We still have a long way to go, but yes. I'm sure you'll succeed because of your passion and dedication to this field. I think very optimistically that it will be a success. Okay.
There we go. So phase one, as far as partners, it was the Fulbright, the Museum of Natural History here at the UPLB. And then I would be very remiss if I also didn't mention, we received, I would say, a lot of support from there's the National Museum. Dr. Arvin Jesmos was very keen on the project. And then Noel Raphael of Avalon Zoo was also, he used to come out, I would say he'd visit the project at least every 2 weeks. And so I want to give my thanks to those supporters as well. So of course, here's just a shot of the Museum of Natural History. And here is where, that old saying, here's where the magic happens. Here's the Hortorium, which has sat there. It was not being used in 2015 when I first came here. And then we sort of put it to work to hold phase one. So to the left, if you look, when we talk about keeping frogs in captivity, there are always trade-offs to the setups that you give the frogs. You're never going to perfectly recreate nature. It's just impossible. So on one end of the spectrum, you can have extremely sterile environments. If you saw in Panama, there was, for the Atelopus frogs, there were paper towels and plastic shelters, and that was it. And then on the other end, you can give your frogs very realistic terrariums with soil that are beautiful. But if you have 100 frogs to take care of, it's really a pain. So we settled for something sort of in between. The frogs might be a little difficult to see. They all had a water section. They had some coconut core for humidity, living plants inside this converted plastic tank, which we put some, I think here it's called Amazon wire on as a screen. And here you can see the tanks, some of the tanks here just all lined up. Very easy system of keeping track. Post-it notes are great because since they're only a little bit sticky, they sort of remain a little bit sticky forever. So you write one up, and then when you transfer the frog to a new clean tank during cleaning, you just transfer the Post-it note. Very easy. You'll notice that it's at a slight angle because we would have, there was a student, Joe Noel, who was a big help. He would come in, clean the tanks, water the frogs. The water runs down into a gutter that's underneath here and out into the drain. So that way, keep those tanks nice and clean. And you can see here, here's just some of the labeling that we did. And now this one is a little bit, this was something I was working on. One of the things that I was thinking is how do we breed direct developing frogs, Platymentus, in captivity? Because what's very common to get frogs to breed in captivity, you simulate a rainy season. First, you give them a little bit of a rest by simulating a slightly drier season, and then put them in a tank with simulated rain. But the problem is we don't need standing water for tadpoles. So this has a false bottom. This is all water. There's a pump in there and as you can see, a mister. And it's sort of a rainforest in a tank. So you turn on the pump, it mists, it shoots rain out of this little stick with holes drilled in it. But there's no standing water for the frogs to, for the eggs to drown in or something like that. Now this photo is a little blurry, but here are two. This is Platymentus Luzonensis. There's a male over here. Here's a bigger female here. You can see here's the false bottom. So these two in the breeding tank together. And so then we also did an educational tank for students that come to visit the Museum of Natural History. Avalon Zoo was kind enough to donate the tank. I think this very beautiful tank. This held some Racco forest frogs for a while. And then here's just a couple of pictures of field work. Us collecting the frogs up near I think this was taken near the, what is it called? The steam pool in Mount McKeeling, or the volcanic ponds. So yeah, that was fun. And then, so we can real quick look at the frogs that we kept in phase 1. Unless any questions, or I think you're muted.
Sir, how often do you clean the tanks?
Okay. So you do a daily clean, which is
daily.
You check for feces, anything like that, uneaten insects. You don't want to leave those in there. But then weekly, we would actually, it was actually very easy, because if you look at the frogs we had at least double the number of empty tanks. And those tanks had already been cleaned in bleach water and then rinsed and set up. And it was very easy. Once a week, the frogs went into a new tank. Their little Post-it note followed them. And then all those dirty tanks were washed in bleach water and rinsed and then prepared for the following week. So yeah, a daily sort of mini clean and then a weekly deep clean.
Do you also observe mortalities in your collection?
Sorry?
Mortalities, yeah.
We did have a couple mortalities. So one of the frogs coming up, Platymentus Mimulus, which is a very tiny frog. Now, near as we can tell, the reason for it is because since they're such a tiny frog, and any sudden changes, they would dry out faster than the other frogs, or they would get too cold faster than so I believe, I don't have my notes in front of me, but I think we had 3 mortalities of them. I would have to double check that though, the exact number. What surprised me is we kept a species, I think at the time it was Hylarana similis. I think now it's Pulchrana similis. I was certain that we would have at least one mortality because they were very jumpy. They liked to, they were calm, but the second you open the cage, they start jumping around, banging their heads. But we did not have any. So it was Platymentus Mimulus that we had some mortalities.
Okay, so now you have opened the world of Project Palaka to all the people, and they see how we have made that beautiful setup inside the hortorium. And now we are restoring it, re-enlivening it, so that we can further do the work for the Project Palaka Phase 2. Okay. Can we now proceed to what is Phase 2 all about, or are there any other highlights that we would like to show for Phase 1?
I'll just quickly go through the frogs we kept in Phase 1. But I'll just move right from there right on into Phase 2, and we'll just be, I only have a couple of slides of the frogs from Phase 1. So of course, Rhacophorus pardalis, which is just a beautiful, beautiful tree frog that we mainly kept to see that we could keep it in captivity for future educational purposes, because of course children would just love, you know, a bright green tree frog like this. Most of the Platymantis frogs are sort of cryptically colored. So one species of bright green tree frog for the kids. We had Platymentus corrugatus, which honestly is one of my favorite species. This may not be the most scientific thing to say, but I swear they actually have personality. I would love to study these guys more. They're such a cool species, in my opinion. Platymentus Luzonensis, another fun species. Now here we go, Platymentus Mimulus. Here's the one where we had a few mortalities, and you can see there's somebody's finger. I think that's Joe Noel's finger, and that's a fully grown adult.
Whoa, small.
It's very small. We were having so interestingly enough, we figured out their diet very quickly. We knew that we couldn't keep ants, but we were able to successfully keep termites, and these guys went crazy for termites. So food was not an issue. The ones that died, I really believe it's because they just got too dry. They were too dry. And then of course the very similar Platymentus dorsalis, and then here's Hylarena, I think now Pulchrana similis. This is when I say that these animals are skittish, this is the best photo I had, because if it wasn't hiding, it was jumping all around. So now that we looked at them very briefly, just jump right into Phase 2. So as Dr. Letty said, Phase 2, we were fortunate enough, we have attracted, we can say in many ways that the world is looking, and I say that in a good way. They want this project to succeed. And it all started with, in 2019, I was awarded a grant from the Amphibian Ark. Now, the Amphibian Ark only gives a grant for the ex situ setup. So they gave us money for the facilities, the tanks, all of that good stuff, the filters, everything. Then the Center for Environment and Society at Washington College. So Washington College is my undergraduate alma mater, and it is run by one of my old professors. And they took a liking to the research I'm doing, and they wanted to support it as best they could. So they designated me as a research scholar at their Center for Environment and Society. A very cool place. And it's quite an honor. And then after that, we ended up ASAP. So I had never heard of ASAP. I think it's relatively new. It's the Asian Species Action Partnership. And I really would like to say a big thanks goes out to Narissa at ASAP, because she really believed in this project. And not only did they commit to supporting us, but it's because of her work that she helped bring other partners to the table, such as Synchronicity Earth, which is based in the UK, the Wildlife Reserve Singapore Group, which ASAP is sort of folded into. I believe it's related to Wildlife Reserve Singapore. And then there's Stiftung Artenschutz, which is it's sort of a collaboration of zoos and animal parks in Europe. So all of these organizations have signed on, not just, when we talk about partnerships and support, we're often talking about grants and grant money, and that is important and it's very much appreciated. But for example, next week I take my final exam. ASAP has signed me up for a class in conservation project management, and I actually take my final exam next week. So when I say that these are our international partners, I really mean it in the truest sense. They all want to see this project succeed very strongly. And they are not only supporting us through grants, but also any kind of capacity building that is within their capability to provide. So I feel very fortunate they have all signed on. So that brings us to our...
I should also attend that class. Shouldn't I, Norman?
What's that?
I should also attend that class with ASAP.
Well,
I?
Well, they only had one slot available. Now, actually, going back to this slide, there's of course one partner that's not listed here simply because of use of logo. There's issue with, but of course, National Geographic is now, as a National Geographic explorer, when you're given that grant, it's to do a project. Specifically, they are supporting Project Palaka Phase 2. So of course we are thankful to National Geographic as well. So our target species, Platymentus Insolatus. This is an interesting little frog, only found on the Gigantes Islands here in the Philippines. There are records of it existing on 4 of the 10 islands in the Gigantes Island group, but now it looks like perhaps it's down to 1 or 2 islands, probably 2. It is, to my knowledge, the only frog in the Philippines that has been listed as IUCN critically endangered. So obviously this is a high conservation priority. It lives in the karst caves of Gigantes Island, or the Gigantes Islands. It also utilizes the forests near the caves at night when it is active and seeking food. So this is rather than all those other species that we were looking at, we kept a number of species. For Phase 2, we were looking at this species in particular. And so, of course, there's the hortorium again. As you can see, really sort of working on cleaning it up a bit. New doors. There's both a new outer door, and the interior used to be entirely open. There were no doors inside. We've installed doors because we're going to have to be very efficient with climate control. We don't want just open doorways. We also need to ensure biosecurity. So I've installed doors, new electricity, interior plumbing. On the left here, screening in the insect room. We're going to be raising our own insects for food. And so the screening has been put up because, as you can see, there's some old termite tracks that we have to clean off. So we want to keep our bugs inside and the other bugs outside. And then in the rooms where we're keeping the frogs, we've used some polycarbonate sheeting. Has a pretty decent insulation factor. And this is going to be not only just to keep insects and other animals out, but also I'm going to be installing air conditioning units to keep the frogs at the proper temperatures. And then, of course, as you can see, we're going to be cleaning quite a bit. Next week, we are waterproofing the roof because there's a leak. And then after that, we're going to power wash the walls, paint it, and then we're going to be setting up the tanks. So it's been a long time coming, but we're finally there. So here's where we're going to be. So there's Manila. Doesn't even show the link. So I guess we're somewhere around here.
Yeah.
UPLB. Yeah. And we're going here, which if you pull out from the map, it looks like we're going to the middle of the Visayas Sea. But we're looking, first we're going to look at South and North Gigantes Islands, because that's the most likely place to find this species.
And we're going to geomap them, right? Geotag the pods where we will.
Yep, we're going to be, so we have received our gratuitous permit from the DENR Region 6. So first off, what we're going to do in June is just go out for a population count. Or it's a little more than that. We're going to do a baseline population count. We're going to set up permanent population monitoring transects. We're going to do a threat assessment, a habitat assessment, really get all of our baseline information. You'll notice I earmarked Turtle Cave. I think it's Pawikan Cave. And there's a 2012 study that found quite a bit of Platymentus Insolatus there. So, of course, start there and work our way out. So we're currently planning on starting here, looking at the rest of Gigantes South, and then traveling to Gigantes North and inspect there as well. Just to give everyone who is watching at home an idea, of course, I have not been in the caves of Gigantes yet, but one of the things that is considered a possible threat for Platymentus insulatus is there's actually quite a bit of tourism to Gigantes. The caves are very popular. And of course, the caves, this is the type of habitat where Platymentus insulatus lives. So luckily there are pictures online to show everyone. And then this is some of the forested area. You'll notice very small trees near the Pawikan Cave. So this is going to be the type of habitat we're working in. At least that's what we expect. With this species, there's so much that we're not entirely sure of, that there's probably going to be a lot of unknown unknowns, and we will have to adapt once we get there and see what the actual situation is with the number of individuals we encounter.
Okay, that's nice. Exciting.
Yeah.
Yes, very nice. Thank you for walking us through to your Palaka project, Sir Norman. And at this point, I think we are nearing the end of our episode. I would like to present to you my co-host, Dr. Letty, who composed a poem about the topic, and she's going to recite it to us, no? And take it away, Doc Letty.
But before I read the poem, you will be asked to give a final message later.
Yeah, I was thinking it's after you have read the poem. So
I'm going to ask him, please include in your message how students can possibly be involved in this, but not within the COVID period, because the university really says no to field work and no to laboratory work for student exposure. No? But the potentials of how they can get engaged and how they can see through a possible opening for future career, just like you. You've been very successful so far in generating grants, etc. Then I would like you to do some encouragement based on your personal experiences, so that students would find more reasons to be, well, my students in herpetology are really excited to become herpetologists.
Very good.
So yeah. So here is the poem for you and for the frogs. The title is Frogs, Puerto Rico, Belize, Panama, and Philippines. Frogs are vertebrates with moist skins and mostly small, rarely noticed, unattractive, and disliked by many people. But they are important creatures that play an essential role. They indicate the state of environment where they have set their home. Frogs are key species in the balanced cycle of life. They are predators to many invertebrates that quickly multiply. Without them that feed upon hundreds of insects each night, we can't imagine how large populations of them we would need to fight. When they disappear in rivers or forests that serve as habitats, this means the place is in torment, so their species won't last. The frogs would mostly die or find some better spots. Native frogs can tolerate dry, disturbed, and polluted areas. The frogs that will be the focus in the KLY session today are part of the career path of a guy I met through a surprise email. He asked me to be his research advisor in an unexpected way. He wanted to research on the Philippine frogs on XC2 scale. From Puerto Rico with a Fulbright grant to UPLB he came. Norman Greenhawk had rich herpetological experiences to share. His field and lab experiences in Belize and Panama are great, and his interest on Philippine frogs is precious but rare. In Puerto Rico, he worked with Tropic Ventures Research and Education Foundation. They manage a 400-hectare sustainable forestry project for educational conservation. Frogs are yellow-chinned anoles, common cookies, and Cook's rubber frog, or El Cajon. In Makiling, they are the lookalikes of our Platymentus, which are very common. In Belize, human-animal conflict was interceded by the American Crocodile Education Sanctuary, now named ACES Wildlife Rescue, that protects the Crocodilus acutus and C. morelleti. He also worked on the Rio Bravo Conservation and Management Area property. The Mexican burrowing frog and arboreal red-eyed frogs covered 4% protected areas of the country. The Panama Amphibian Rescue and Conservation Project was the office that conducted an XC2 project focused on frogs of the genus Atelopus. This frog group seemed to be especially vulnerable to chytrid fungus. Colorful harlequin frogs, namely Atelopus Limosis, A. certus, and A. glyphos. In 2015, at the UPLB MNH Hortorium, the project Palaka was born. The old building was refurbished for water systems, air conditioning, and aquarium, where XC2 observations on Rhacophoridae and Platymantis were performed, and details of the Batrachorium were documented for more researches to come. So now, the Project Palaka has come to venture and fulfill the objective of the XC2 research for species of frogs in the brink, those which are threatened and may be saved from becoming extinct. If their biology is understood, their field survival can have a better win. Okay, so
Very nice poem,
Very
Dr.
nice.
Effie. And that is one of our tokens for Sir Norman for
Thank you.
sharing with us this Palaka project. So at this point, I would like to request Sir Norman to give us a final message to our listeners of Kwentong Likas Yaman with regards to the topic Palaka project or Project Palaka. Take it away, Sir Norman.
Okay, well, let's see. As far as just any listeners in general, it doesn't matter if you are a scientist or a conservationist or not. Anyone can be involved with conservation through our daily actions. I am surprised at the number of conservation organizations here in the Philippines, and I can't even list them all. And I'll bet if you just do a quick search, you can find one near you where you can learn from, volunteer at, or something. You don't have to be a professionally trained scientist to help preserve your country's biodiversity. That's the first thing. And that applies to anyone, anywhere in the world, not just here in the Philippines. For students, for people who do want to become professionally trained conservationists, scientists, ecologists, boy, let me think here. What can we say about that? Well, one I would say is don't give up. If that is truly what you want to do, don't give up. I've met, I guess, many kindred spirits here in the Philippines, simply in so much as was mentioned, I'm the first person in my family to ever attend college, and I have met a lot of young Filipinos who are in that same boat. It's all new for them. I know what that feels like. I also know what it feels like to feel embarrassed because you feel like you don't know anything. I won't share how old I am, but I am older than the average grad student. I just got my master's 2 years ago, and I would say I'm a good 10 years older than most of my cohort that was in there. So at times it was really hard to admit that I didn't know everything. Well, to the students out there listening, you don't know everything, and you never will. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to collaborate. Don't be afraid to just say, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Be very wary of someone who says that they do know the answer to everything. But more than anything, just keep at it. I'm a late comer in many ways to my career, but I haven't stopped yet. And so if you're young and you have that opportunity and the blessings of youth with all the energy that comes with being young, then by all means focus it and put it to good work. And just don't feel that you can't do it, because you can if you just take the time and commit yourself. And that's not just with frogs. If you want to be an ornithologist or an ichthyologist, same thing applies. But if any students are out there listening, as soon as it is allowed, again, as soon as students return to campus and are allowed to engage, if you are interested in Project Palaka, come by the hortorium, email Dr. Letty, email Dr. Gonzalez, email Dr. Marian De Leon, who is the new director of the museum, and she is already a valuable, amazing partner who has done a lot for our project, or visit our website, and I'm sure we can find something for you. Whether it's you might start cleaning frog tanks, but we will find something for you. We will make a spot somehow. So I don't want anyone to be turned away who wants to work and gain experience at Project Palaka.
Thank you so much. You are very inspiring, Sir Norman, and I do believe that you'll be successful in your plans about this Palaka project. Sir Letty, Ma'am Letty.
Again, everyone, to our listeners, we are truly glad and proud that Norman is our guest today. The words he left for the students and the rest of the community, I would agree whole, 120% in agreement for that. We love our country, we love its biodiversity, and look at a guy who is not even Filipino, who takes his time and puts his passion on the Philippine frogs. Let's help one another. Let's care. Let's look around us. There is so much to do, and there is so much to learn. Don't put dirt in the environment, but appreciate every bit of it and appreciate every life in it, because it has been there for a purpose. One of our purposes there is to learn, to experience, and to enrich ourselves, as well as to sustain the life together with them. Because this environment will never be beautiful as it is when those other lives would be gone and will be destroyed. So for KLY, our Kwentong Likas Yaman, great thanks to Norman. Great thanks to everyone who listened today. See you again in the next episode.
Thank you for having me. This was great. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Okay, thank you so much. See you next week for another episode of Kwentong Likas Yaman. Happiness!
Yes.